Hey, my name's Hubwood, and this is probably the longest video I've made so far. As it took forever to make, feel free to like it if you enjoyed the content. Now, in today's video, I'm testing over 50 games with a brand new Acer Swift X in the RTX 3050 and Ryzen 5 5600U combination, accompanied by 60GB of DDR4 RAM with a speed of 4266 MHz in dual channel mode. If you would like to see a full review on this laptop, please check out the link in the description as soon as it's ready, or click the info card in the upper right corner right now. To ensure a good airflow, all tests were made on a laptop stand without activated coolers, while the laptop was of course plugged in. But I also compared the laptop's performance plugged in versus unplugged, so make sure to check out that video as well. I recorded via capture card at Full HD with VSync off to ensure maximum performance and no FPS loss due to recording. If DLSS was available, I was using it. If it was able to set the DLSS quality, I was using balanced mode. The games will be tested alphabetically, so it's easier for you to find a game in the timeline. Also check the description for a full list of games. Dynamic boost is on by default, but it's hard to tell when it's working and when not. You can check the GPU power in most of the games I've recorded. The standard would be 35 watt, and anything above that would mean that dynamic boost is currently active. The maximum TDP for this graphics card would be 40 watt. The small 4GB of VRAM certainly are being a limitation in some games, so I was only testing settings that would be okay with 4GB of VRAM. No use in testing above that, as it gets unplayable in most games. Feel free to skip through the games, but leaving the video running for a bit won't do no harm for my channel as well. Either way, enjoy. Oh, and let me point out that I didn't have any crashes due to all the testing, which took probably 50 hours in total. In today's first game, which is Anno 1800, DirectX 11 gave a few more FPS, so of course I've tested it with DirectX 11. On medium settings, I got an average of around 53 FPS with a 1% low of 25. Though you can't really trust these numbers that much, as in Anno 1800 it depends a lot on how big your cities are, on which continent you're currently playing, etc. The frame rate is pretty stable, but the 1% low sometimes drastically drop due to a map change, which causes a short lag, but that won't harm your gameplay. Overall, the game is perfectly playable at an acceptable quality. In Apex Legends, I was getting around 88 FPS on medium settings with a 1% low of around 57 FPS. The frame times are smooth and stable, even in firefights. Not that that would help me anyhow, as you can see, but still around 90 FPS on a small ultrabook, I would say you can definitely enjoy that. Assassin's Creed Valhalla was running fine on medium settings with an average of 51 FPS and a good 1% low of 37 FPS. Perfectly enjoyable for a single-player third-person open-world title. This is one of the examples though in which I wished the display had an adaptive sync option, since you can't reach a stable 60 FPS, which you could then lock via VSync. But thanks to 12 threads, 16GB dual channel RAM and a fast SSD, games like these basically run buttery smooth. You can't choose higher settings though, as the small VRAM would then cause heavy frame drops. It just won't work good enough. I've also tested Assassin's Creed Odyssey on medium settings, which run a bit faster than Valhalla, with an average of 60 FPS and a 1% low of 28 FPS in my test run. But I'm sure the 1% low would get better over time. It took a while longer than expected, until the frames stabilized though. Maybe I run into some bugs or driver issues here, so take these results with a grain of salt. In Age of Empires 4 I saw an average of around 60 FPS on the highest settings with a 1% low of 34 FPS, which in a game like this should not be a problem. It was fluid and I never thought about the performance when playing, which is kinda good, right? Just perfectly playable in my opinion. In Ark Survival, I saw an average FPS of around 42 FPS and a 1% low of 32 FPS on medium settings at a resolution scaling of 100%, just because I don't think the game looks flattering on settings lower than that. But it's still playable, and I guess people expect Ark to run a bit, well, clunky I guess. And why the hell is this always happening when I'm walking along this beach? Anybody knows? In Battlefield 5 I was playing on a 64-player conquest map, choosing medium settings, and saw an average of 76 FPS with a 1% low of 45. And like in many games, the 45 FPS 1% low would probably be higher after a long session when basically every sound, sprite and texture is fully buffered and cached. However, I would consider it pretty playable. By the way, if you are disagreeing with my opinions on good or bad playability, please let me know in the comments. I'm eager to learn what's on your mind in that matter. I also gave City Skylines a quick test, and in my small or medium-sized city, I don't know, I saw an average of only 37 FPS on medium settings with a 1% low of 22. To be honest, I was expecting a bit more, but then on the other hand, it's been a while since I've played this title and I can't really tell how the game should run. I guess it's still playable that way though, as it's a strategy building game that doesn't need fast reflexes. In Civilization 6 I was running the integrated benchmarks on high settings, resulting in somewhat around 40 FPS with an average turn time of 8 seconds. Perfectly playable on this tiny laptop. Keep in mind that the low power Ryzen 5 in this thing has a performance comparable to an Intel i7 8700K, which was the gaming flagship CPU 3 years ago. So nothing to worry about here. Just enjoy another turn, and the last turn. In Call of Duty Warzone I saw an average of around 78 FPS on medium settings with activated DLSS on balanced, with a pretty good 1% low of 58 FPS. Again, thanks to 16GB of fast dual channel RAM and 12 threads, the experience could be considered very satisfying. Sure, it's not 144Hz, super pro gameplay material, but we're talking about a 14-inch 1.4kg sub $1000 Ultrabook here. And for that, this is pretty good. Keep in mind that 16GB of dual channel RAM are mandatory for Warzone on many systems. So if you're having a similar system with bad FPS and lags, it just might be the RAM. Control benefits a lot from DLSS and it still looks amazing. Sometimes it even looks better, which is crazy. So I saw a perfect average of 60 FPS on medium settings with DLSS activated and a 1% low of 45 FPS. That's basically perfect for this 60Hz screen. I would just cap the FPS at 60 and enjoy a perfectly smooth frame rate and frame times. The 1% low being so close to the average FPS indicates that there are almost no frame drops or lags even in heavier firefights. In CSGO I was getting an average of around 182 FPS on medium settings with a 1% low of 90. Of course you won't benefit from the high FPS in terms of the screen, but at least the input lag is getting very low that way, unless you're using an external fast FPS monitor, which I guess not so many people would with such a laptop anyhow. Still, the game is of course once more perfectly playable that way. Cyberpunk 2077 was one of the most demanding games, if not the most demanding game of today's test next to Ark. On medium settings with activated DLSS on balanced mode, I saw an average of only around 45 FPS with a 1% low of 30. As you can see, fast driving results in some frame drops and a clunky frame time graph. I mean, it's playable, sure, it's just not as buttery smooth as other games I've tested on this laptop, at least on medium settings. I mean, you could of course choose low settings. But be prepared for a frame drop here and there. In Destiny 2 I've only been testing the intro level on high settings. But the MSI Afterburner OSD won't work in this game as no OSDs are allowed, so I would have to refer to the in-game FPS counter, which was somewhat between 50 and 90 FPS depending on the scene and surroundings. I guess it's safe to say that you get a FPS around above 60 FPS, and it felt super fluent and smooth, so I guess the 1% low should be pretty high as well. I didn't expect Dirt 5 to be that demanding, to be honest. On medium settings I saw an average of around 60 FPS after finishing some tracks. The 1% low was pretty high and very close to the average FPS with around 45 FPS. The frame time graph is super flat, which is always welcome. If you're hunting high scores and records, you could always crank down the graphics a bit though, as the CPU might have some headroom left in this title. In Doom Eternal's single-player campaign, I saw an expected high average FPS of around 103 FPS on medium settings and a 1% low of 64. Of course, this game needs quite high FPS to be played in the way it's meant to be. Fast, very fast. I'm actually getting kinda seasick watching my own gameplay footage. Jesus. Or Lucifer, whatever you prefer. Anyhow, perfectly playable once more. Check. Next. Dota 2 on Ultra settings was no problem for the Acer Swift X, with a high average of 100 FPS and a 1% low of 62 FPS. Looking at the GPU load though, suggests that the lower settings won't get you much more FPS. I'm not very familiar with the graphics engine, to be honest, so I don't know if the game is a bit more CPU bound. But the Ryzen 5 5600U has a great single core performance in general, so that shouldn't be bottlenecking too hard. But whatever, I mean the game just runs fine. Since the free-to-play shooter Enlisted offers DLSS, I was using it of course in balanced mode and the high graphics preset and saw a good average of 86 FPS and a 1% low of 45 FPS, which might seem a bit low, but as you can see the OSD was going crazy in this game and I couldn't see the frame time graph, but it felt fluid and enjoyable anyhow. So I wouldn't worry if this game is one of your favorites. You would just be able to play it perfectly smooth. So you can't blame the laptop if one of these crowds got ya. In Fortnite I was using settings that some people call pro settings, meaning everything is set to low except the viewing distance set to the maximum. Plus I have activated shadows on medium because it makes such a visual difference. Anyhow, with the pro settings I was getting an average of around 138 FPS and a 1% low of 72 FPS over the length of a whole match. Frame times were great and there were almost no stutters like at all. And to be honest, I didn't even activate DLSS because I forgot, but it's not even really necessary. But of course you would activate DLSS because, I mean, free FPS, you know. So expect over 150 FPS. In the brand new Forza Horizon 5, which actually came out the day I'm recording this, I saw an average of 75 FPS on medium settings and a 1% low of around 53. So I guess that's perfectly playable. Please excuse the recording though, which looks a bit stuttery as I had issues with my capture card, but in reality it was super smooth and the game looks really great. As Genshin Impact is limited to 60 FPS, at least to my knowledge, it's all about the question if the laptop can hit stable 60 FPS on average with medium settings, and the answer is a clear yes. But since this can't be played on mediocre smartphones from 2 years ago, I don't see why this laptop shouldn't be able to as well. Looking good, being fluid, that's a clear, perfectly playable award for this game. The brand new Guardians of the Galaxy is pretty demanding, but luckily it has DLSS. Yay! So on medium settings and balanced DLSS I was getting a very playable experience with around 45 FPS on average in the first level, over a benchmark run of around 15 minutes. The 1% low was around 28. The game looks pretty neat and runs absolutely satisfying in my opinion. You could get 60 FPS on average by a combination of further lowering the graphics or using DLSS in a higher mode. Mind that the small 14-inch screen of the Acer Swift X is pretty forgiving, so turning down the resolution to 900p actually can always be an option. GTA 5 ran without any problems on high settings with an average of 72 FPS and a 1% low of 50 FPS. Frame times were super stable. This should also apply to GTA Online, as the CPU is absolutely capable enough of handling the background tasks, so you could actually use even higher settings and cap the FPS at 60 I guess. In Horizon Zero Dawn, I was using the so-called original preset, which is supposed to look like the PS4 console version, I guess. However, to me, this medium preset actually looks like ultra settings in other games, so considering I saw an average of 55 FPS with a 1% low of 34 on the Acer Swift X, I'm satisfied. There's just so much flora and fauna going on, I'm always impressed. Small ultrabooks can play such games that way these days. Sure, we are missing a stable 60 FPS here, but I guess we're close enough. Run, Aloy, run! I actually tested the co-op hit It Takes Two with a friend on the Acer Swift X. To me the game looks great, like a Pixar movie, and it's a ton of fun. Anyhow, on the high preset, it actually ran perfectly fine with an average of 64 FPS and a 1% low of 36 FPS. If you do have friends or siblings and haven't played it yet, do it. It's amazing, and it would run superb on the Acer Swift X. In Jedi Fallen Order, I was only testing the Epic preset, resulting in an average of around 48 FPS and a 1% low of 36. The game is pretty demanding in terms of the CPU, because older CPUs and especially old 4 cores are a problem, but it just worked fine. You could surely lower the graphics, as the game still looks pretty good even on low settings, to achieve a higher average FPS. For the medieval hit Kingdom Come Deliverance, I was testing the medium preset, resulting in a great average of 60 FPS and a 1% low of 39 FPS. And I'm just going to stop talking for a few seconds here so you could enjoy one of the most beautiful gaming woods of all time, still up to this day. Being a Life is Strange fanboy of the first hour, I was of course testing the newest installment of the series, True Colors. On high settings, which actually look pretty great, as the game's graphics has been evolving over the years, I was getting a perfect 64 FPS on average with a 1% low of 32. As the game never needs you to have fast reflexes, anything above 30 would be fine too, but I'll take the 60 as well of course. In League of Legends, I was using ultra graphics, resulting in a very high average FPS of 146 and an amazing 1% low of 111. So you could of course easily play this game on a professional basis that way. Hell, even a 144Hz screen would make sense in that case. For Metro Exodus, I was only using the integrated benchmark, as I'm too lazy to go through the intro again since a cloud save game error destroyed my progress again. Thanks Epic, but on the medium preset I saw an average of 49 FPS and a 1% low of 24. I guess the actual gameplay would be a bit higher because it doesn't have that one weird scene that would even make a NASA computer sweat for no reason. Duh. Hey, I tested Minecraft with RTX activated by popular demand. Or at least this one guy was asking for it. And it works. It actually works with ray tracing, DLSS and maximum graphics enabled, with around 43 FPS on average and a 1% low of 35. I guess that's about the only game where activating RTX would make any sense. Okay, maybe there are some games that get stable 30 FPS with RTX and DLSS in performance mode. That might be, if that's okay for you. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, I was using the medium preset and saw an average frame rate of 35 FPS and a 1% low of 23 when flying over New York City. Doesn't sound much, but Microsoft Flight Simulator is pretty demanding and it's actually okay with 30 FPS as you seldom have super quick moves or such. I mean, look at it. It just looks fine, right? There can be some drops below 30 when a lot of tree stuff and such is going on. So be careful when flying over Canada, I guess. I've heard they have some pretty big woods over there. New World actually set the laptop on fire. I mean, New World was actually running just fine. On the medium preset, the game looks pretty good and still gets an average of 55 FPS and a 1% low of 38. Again, it depends a lot on where you measure the FPS, as areas aren't equally demanding. If you are okay with 35 FPS, you could also choose the very high settings, as it still would run okay that way and it looks noticeably better. So please appreciate me buying the game just for the sake of this video and hit that like button so I can feed my 2 little kids because they're getting hungry, so hungry. You wouldn't believe what they ate last Friday, and the drinking, it's always Apfelschorle for them, and then they want a chocolate. I find it kinda hard to test No Man's Sky, as it depends so much on the planet you are on right now, or the space station, or your ship. The FPS were somewhere in between 40 and 120 FPS, but on this planet I was getting a high average of 69 FPS and a 1% low of 46. A 1% low of 2. Forget it. It actually runs fine. On the so-called improved preset with DLSS in balanced mode, again, DLSS saves the day. The whole RTX 3050 series starts to make sense now. Ori and the Blind Forest was another viewer's choice, but the Acer Swift X is actually super bored by it, the GPU being around 34% load only. I'm 100% sure you could easily play it at 4K in maximum settings with a stable 60 FPS. The VRAM wouldn't cause any problems. In other words, I guess it doesn't get much better than this. In Overwatch, I was using the high preset with 100% resolution scaling, resulting in an average of 119 FPS and a 1% low of 63 over the course of 3 matches against bots. Choosing higher settings in Overwatch doesn't change a lot in terms of appearance, in my opinion, and you won't notice a lot anyhow when being in the middle of a fight. So high settings are fine, I guess. As are the results. I would almost call this pro gaming compatible. In PUBG, I was getting a pretty acceptable 79 FPS on medium settings with a 1% low of 63 FPS, even on the graphically demanding jungle map, which I don't know the name right off now, sorry. Well, whatever. Look how I'm sneaking here to these houses, in which nobody is inside anyhow. Well, next. I have absolutely no idea on how to play this game, so I can only refer to the integrated benchmark, which resulted in superb 151 FPS on ultra settings. Yes, you heard me, ultra settings. The 1% low being an insane 131. Do people actually play this on refrigerators and Raspberry Pis? Let me know in the comments. I was testing Red Dead Redemption 2 on medium settings using Vulkan and DLSS on balanced settings, resulting in a perfect 63 FPS on average with a 1% low of 56. I can't stress this out enough how good DLSS is once more. A real game changer. The more games get DLSS, the more sense the RTX 3050 and 3050 Ti will actually make. I didn't get that many FPS on my GTX 1060 laptop. That is just impressive. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually providing one of the best DLSS experiences in my opinion. What do you think? Would you use DLSS in Red Dead Redemption 2 if you could? Let me know in the comments. Of course, Rocket League didn't cause any problems, running at 150 FPS on average with a 1% low of 96 FPS on ultra settings. And come on, this is at least worthy goal of the week here, right? Right? Oh. I was using the medium preset on Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Actually, using DLSS didn't help in this game. I don't know if it's a driver error, but the FPS actually got worse using it, so let's ignore it here for once. So at the regular medium preset, I was getting an average of 53 FPS with a high 1% low of 47 FPS. Perfectly playable for me. You might break the 60 FPS when using 900p. As said before, this could actually be an option on the small Acer Swift X's 14-inch screen. The Crew 2 ran with around 59 FPS on average with a 1% low of around 30 FPS, which is a bit low to be honest. I'm not super impressed in terms of performance versus graphic details in this title. But you can't have everything, I guess, considering the open world is insanely big, maybe only surpassed by Microsoft Flight Simulator. But this Inception trick in the intro, that's just sick. I'll give him that. Again, for the Division 2, I have no clue on how to play that, so I'll spare you actual gameplay for the sake of all of us and refer to the integrated benchmark, which gave me an average of 61 FPS on medium settings. I guess that's fine, right? The horror adventure, the medium, actually provides DLSS, so of course I was using that, resulting in an average FPS of 61 on high settings and a 1% low of 20, which is kind of a shame, because the game had some weird recurring FPS drops, as you can see in the frame times. I guess it's still playable, but I wasn't able to get rid of it, like the ticking of a clock in an old abandoned house, when suddenly you're hearing kids' voices from the second floor, except nobody should be there. Okay, jokes aside, I don't know what was going on there. What the fuck? Help me! Call the fucking Ghostbusters! Help! In The Witcher 3 I saw an average of 63 FPS at medium settings with a 1% low of 43 FPS. I might have mentioned it before, but any laptop that can run The Witcher in a satisfying way has every right to exist. You know what I mean? Well, anyhow, I'm fine with that result, I guess. Okay, Geralt, see you. I was testing Valheim on medium to high settings, as shown here, and saw an average of 50 FPS and a 1% low of 34 FPS, which is just fine for this kind of game. Yeah, the graphics is not appealing to some of you, I get that, but I actually enjoy the lighting and atmosphere, which to me actually looked like it had ray tracing activated. To be honest, I do like it. Valorant was running with an average of 144 FPS and a 1% low of 92 on medium settings. To be honest, I'm always a bit confused by the fact that this game never seems to fully utilize neither the GPU or the CPU on any system. If you know why that is happening, let me know in the comments. I mean, it's absolutely playable that way, but why waste so much potential? Is it the engine? Shouldn't this work better? It's not the laptop, I've had these issues before. Anyhow, it's playable just perfectly fine this way. I was just expecting more, I guess. In Watchdogs Legion, I was getting a perfect average of 65 FPS and a 1% low of 44 FPS when using the medium preset and DLSS on balanced mode. As you can see, the frame time graph looks pretty flat and there were no lags and such. Once again, DLSS is working just great, ensuring a stable 60 FPS. I would probably just cap the FPS at 60 in this title. As I am not playing World of Tanks, we'll have to take a look at an integrated benchmark once more. On ultra settings, I was getting around 60 to 100 FPS. According to the buttery smooth frame time graph, the experience should be great. Now let's talk about the Acer Swift Axis virtual reality capability. The laptop is not officially supported for my Oculus Quest, but I was able to play some games when I reduced the internal resolution per eye. The game starts to look a bit blurry that way, but it's playable. But I wouldn't buy a VR set if this laptop was my only PC at home. Maybe for a quick session on the go here and there though. So in Half-Life Alyx I was using the low settings of course and reduced the resolution to around 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels per eye. That enabled a frame time high enough to prevent motion sickness for me. It's actually somewhat okay, good enough to impress friends and family when taking the laptop with you. I was getting an average of around 67 FPS on average, which did not fully utilize my headset's 72Hz screens unfortunately, but again, enough to be okay with it. But be aware that this small 4GB VRAM is going to be a problem here. Arizona Sunshine is, a lighter game considering graphics, story, voiceover and everything else. Well, by reducing the resolution a bit, I was getting an average of 69 FPS anyhow and a 1% low of 36. It's quite about the same as for Half-Life Alyx, playable for fun here and there. Moss is the last title for today's test. I was actually testing it with the Oculus Quest's native resolution and low settings, resulting in an average FPS of only 36 FPS, but that's actually enough in this game, even in VR, because you don't move around yourself like almost at all. It's like playing with a model train, diorama kind of thing. So that would work just perfectly fine, to be honest. Okay, that is seriously all for today. I'm tired. This was fun, but also exhausting. So I would appreciate it so much if you'd like and or subscribe. All in all, we could definitely say that the Acer Swift X with the RTX 3050 and the Ryzen 5 5600U is definitely capable of gaming. Maybe not always in a professional hardcore kind of way, but often enough it is cracking the 60 FPS average with decent enough graphics, often due to DLSS thanks to the RTX 3050. So, thank you so much for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.